without further ado, I would like to welcome our special guest today, Professor Kishore Mahbubani, to the stage for his keynote speech to address our topic. Please join me giving him a warm round of applause.
Thank you very much. I want to congratulate the MC for being such a spirited MC and remembering things that from a long time ago. Thank you very much for remembering them. And I also want to begin by thanking Professor Barry Wynn and Kian Ming for inviting me here to Taylor's University to inaugurate this distinguished public lecture series. And you did a very wise thing. You must always start with a very low bar. So that you can say anyone who came after that. It's an improvement. But anyway, I'm very happy to be with you all today to address this subject, because actually it's very much on my mind. If there's one thing that keeps me awake at night, it is actually wondering whether or not Southeast Asia will be able to survive the US-China contest. Because there's no question, and I'll explain why later, the US-China contest will accelerate over the next 10 years. And there's no doubt that Southeast Asia will be affected because we are geographically right here next to China and the South China Sea and so on and so forth. So we will be affected. So the question, therefore, it's a real live question as to whether or not Southeast Asia can come out on top. And I'll try to watch my watch, Ken Min, make sure that I don't emulate Fidel Castro and speak to you for 3 hours. And the other reason why I'm very concerned is that in many ways, Southeast Asia has got the most to lose from the US-China contest if it gets really, really bad. And why do I say it has the most to lose? I say that because there's something that surprisingly very few Southeast Asians know, which is that our regional organization, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, is the most successful regional organization in the world. And amazing, this is a spectacular achievement by Southeast Asia. And most Southeast Asians don't know this, which is quite amazing. And I know many of you are going to be skeptical. This cannot be true. So let me ask you a simple question. Right now, do a quick mental tour of the world. Take yourself wherever you want, you know. Take yourself. Maybe this better, yeah. Is that right? Yeah. Take yourself to Latin America, to North America, to Africa, to Central Asia, to South Asia, to Northeast Asia. Where do you get a more successful regional organization? And I'll also discuss the European Union in a minute. I mean, in the case of Latin America, by the way, Latin America is still a much more prosperous region than ASEAN. The per capita income, I think, is double that of Southeast Asia. But their regional organizations are dysfunctional. Some of the new ones cannot even meet. And even the relatively successful Mercosur tried to have a summit meeting. The leaders didn't turn up. So that's Latin America. The Organization of American States, set up a long time ago, is dysfunctional. Completely dysfunctional. And, you know, Africa clearly has a lot of challenges. And to be fair to Africans, they started off from a more difficult starting point, so it's not surprising that they have challenges. You can go to the Middle East, you can go to Central Asia, or even if you go to South Asia, right? We have some representatives from South Asia here. India and Pakistan cannot carry out normal trade. Just trading, just buying and selling things which are mutually beneficial exercise, which most countries do, India and Pakistan cannot do. There are reasons for that. And then you look at Northeast Asia, right? ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, was created in 1967, right? There is still today not a single association of Northeast Asian nations. They cannot start it. They cannot start what Southeast Asia has done, even though Southeast Asia is more diverse than Northeast Asia is. Right? So you can see, therefore, what we have achieved with Southeast Asia is something quite remarkable. And if you look at even the European Union, now clearly the European Union is a collection of much more affluent states, much more successful states, and its GNP, combined GNP, is much bigger, 5 times bigger than ASEAN's. But if you want to judge a regional organization, you got to judge it on the basis of its performance, of its results. So what's the first and most important thing a regional organization needs to do? Is to create peace in the region and at the borders of the region. When the Cold War ended, all the great pundits said, Europe's past is Asia's future. Everybody confidently predicted that the future wars after the Cold War would take place in East Asia. And guess what? We haven't had a major war probably in 45 years since the Sino-Vietnamese War in 1979. And guess where most of the wars been fought? The Yugoslav wars, now the Ukraine war, on the fringes of Europe. And I believe that there's only one test of geopolitical competence. Were you able to prevent wars? And ASEAN passed the test with flying colors, no wars, and the European Union has failed. Because there are many wars it could have prevented if it had been geopolitically competent, and it hasn't done so. And if you look in terms of economic growth and development, look at ASEAN's record. In the year 2000, Japan's economy was 8 times bigger than ASEAN. And Japan was then the world's second biggest economy in the world, Japan. 8 times bigger than ASEAN. Today, Japan is only 1.3 times bigger than ASEAN. By 2030, ASEAN will be bigger than Japan. That's an amazing track record of economic growth. And how does the European Union compare? Between 2010 and 2020, even though the European Union is 5 times bigger than ASEAN, ASEAN contributed more to global economic growth than the European Union did. That's an amazing achievement. So it shows you what ASEAN has done. So we must understand, therefore, that we have something very precious here in Southeast Asia to protect. And at the same time, the other reason why we need to protect ASEAN is that the world order is changing fundamentally. You must be aware that we are living at a time of much greater change than we have seen in 50, 100, 200 years. Major shifts of power are happening, and the world is being transformed across several dimensions. And I describe the new world as a 3M world. Firstly, the first M is that this is a multi-civilizational world. We've had one civilization, Western civilization, dominate the world for 200 years. It's amazing, the Europeans, 100 years ago, could run the world effortlessly. In 1924, I always cite this fact, 100,000 Englishmen could effortlessly rule over 300 million Indians. Can you imagine that today? 100,000 Englishmen going to India, saying it's time for us to rule your country. Can you imagine what would happen to them? Right? It's inconceivable. But the inconceivable was real. It happened. But it's gone. So we're moving from a mono-civilizational world to a multi-civilizational world. And to prepare for the multi-civilizational world, you need a multi-civilizational laboratory. And guess what? There is only one multi-civilizational laboratory in the world. There's only one regional organization that among its 700 million people, close to 700 million people, has 250 million Muslims, 150 million Christians, 150 million Buddhists, Mahayana Buddhists, Hinayana Buddhists, Taoists, Confucianists, Hindus, and I always add, we have lots of communists too. So it's amazing. I mean, again, do a quick mental tour of the world. Go to Latin America, go to Africa, go to Central Asia, go to Northeast Asia, go. Where do you find that kind of diversity? Nowhere else in the world. And the European Union is surrounded by so many Islamic states nearby. Turkey has applied to join for 30 to 40 years. This European Union cannot even accept one member from a different civilization. We can handle all. That's why ASEAN is so special, right? And in a world that is struggling to understand each other, ASEAN can teach the world lessons that no one else can. No one else, right? That's one big dimension of change, a multi-civilizational world. Secondly, it's becoming a multipolar world with lots of powers. And here too, which organization in the world regularly interacts with all the great powers in the world? Right? Which one? Which regional organization has meetings that every year brings together the leaders of all the great powers together? And the answer is ASEAN. Right? The other regional organizations, when they have the annual meetings, do not attract all the powers of the world. So what ASEAN can do is show a culture of inclusiveness to the rest of the world, and this is how you manage a multipolar world. And the third M is multilateral. And clearly, as we move into a smaller global village, which is what we are becoming, we need stronger and stronger multilateral institutions. We need multilateral institutions that can handle diversity, because the world is a diverse place. Again, ASEAN does it. So therefore, preserving and protecting ASEAN is an extremely important thing that we in Southeast Asia need to do, and frankly the rest of the world should also understand that protecting ASEAN is very important. So the big question, therefore, is how do we protect ASEAN? And I believe we can do so in 3 ways. The first way is the most obvious thing that ASEAN needs to do. ASEAN needs to speak out more loudly and more clearly to both the United States and China and tell these two big elephants, if you two want to have a big fight, if you two want to have a big contest, go ahead. Don't get us involved. Don't try and get the ASEAN countries to take sides in this US-China contest. Because if that happens, then ASEAN will break. If we are forced to take sides in this contest. Now we know, as a matter of fact, that most ASEAN states have made it very clear, in one way or another, that they're not going to take sides in this US-China contest. But I think it's not enough for ASEAN states to state this individually. I think it's important for ASEAN to state this collectively and say, we don't want to get involved, and at the same time, we should also make it very clear to US and China, explain to them why protecting ASEAN is very important for the reasons that I spelled out, and that therefore they should see it as in being in their interests to protect ASEAN. Unfortunately, this message from ASEAN has not been conveyed directly, forcefully to Beijing and Washington, D.C. And this is something I think we need to do if we want to protect ASEAN. The second thing that we can do is to advise both United States and China, and as you know, ASEAN is friends of both the United States and China, that they will be better off finding an alternative route instead of trying to go headlong into a contest with each other to decide who's number one in the world. Now, I know it's going to be difficult. I know it's going to be difficult because I actually published a book, Has China Won, with the goal of persuading both sides. And those of you who read my book know that I conclude my book by giving 5 reasons why US and China should get along with each other instead of trying to beat each other up. So clearly my message failed. They continue to beat themselves up. But I think we must nonetheless keep pressing the message to them. Because at the end of the day, let's say from the point of view of the United States, the most fundamental question the United States needs to ask itself is, what's more important for the future of the United States of America? Having primacy in the world or improving the condition of its people? And as you know, sadly, even though the United States is an incredibly rich and successful country, and I always say you must never underestimate the United States as a country, as a great power, it is also a fact that the United States is the only major developed society where the bottom 50% of its population has seen a stagnation in their living standards for decades now. This is not me saying this. There are Nobel laureates like Angus Deaton who have written books to document how this has held back the American people. And amazingly, the United States is also the one major developed country where life expectancy is coming down. When life expectancy comes down, it's a very powerful indicator of dramatic social challenges churning away in the society. So what's more important? Maintaining primacy or taking care of your people? By the way, I've been to the US 4 times this year. I'm going back another 2 times this year. I'm acutely aware of the strong anti-China mood in the US. It's impossible for any American politician to say anything remotely reasonable on China, because if you say anything remotely reasonable on China, you're accused of being what they call a panda hugger, and you're finished politically, right? That's the mood it is. So because the things I express are things that cannot be expressed in the US, we in Southeast Asia can express them and say, really? Why don't you look at your condition? Is primacy that important, that you're sacrificing the needs of your people in the search for primacy? It's a reasonable argument to make, and it's one that we can make and we should be making to the United States. And I think also in the case of China, we can persuade China that we can press the pause button on the geopolitical contest. But the third argument we need to make, which is also, frankly, in some ways possibly the most important argument, which is that our world today is facing other real existential threats. It's a reality. And one existential threat that we face is climate change. It's real. All the evidence is there. And as you know, most people in the world, with the possible exception of Donald Trump, accept the scientific evidence and believe it's real. And when I try to explain how climate change has changed the world, nature of our world, I use a very simple boat analogy. And in this boat analogy, I say in the past, when 8 billion people lived in 193 separate countries, it was as though they were living in 193 separate boats, right? And that was the reality. So if one boat caught COVID, the other boat wouldn't catch COVID. You're in a different boat. How does COVID travel from one boat to another boat? It doesn't. But the world has shrunk. It become a very small, interdependent place. And instead of living in 193 separate boats, we live in 193 separate cabins on the same boat. And what's amazing is that we're getting this evidence on a daily basis. We just had a major pandemic, COVID. One cabin caught COVID. All 193 cabins caught COVID. It's very obvious we're on the same boat. You see that with Mpox again. And when climate change comes, trust me, climate change doesn't worry about borders. It doesn't even know what borders are, right? Whether you're going to get all the horrible consequences that flow from climate change. So if we were sensible, rational people, of course, the human species claims to be sensible, rational. The most sensible thing to do is to protect the entire boat and not your cabin. But when future historians look at our time, they'll be shocked that at a time when our boat, and I'm often inclined to call our boat the Titanic, because we're heading straight towards an iceberg of climate change. Instead of focusing on the iceberg ahead, the occupants of the 2 biggest cabins, United States and China, are busy arguing about who should have the bigger cabin. Now that's an absolutely stupid thing to do if you're on the Titanic. But that's exactly the stupid thing we are doing now with this geopolitical contest. So I hope, therefore, that we in Southeast Asia perhaps should maybe convey a bit of common sense to both the United States and China and say, look at where we are on the same boat, let's take care of climate change, let's press the pause button on the US-China contest. So the final question, therefore, is, will the US and China listen to us? Will they press the pause button on this contest in the next 10 years? And I always try to be a relatively realistic person and give myself odds of whether or not it can be done. And I would say the odds of us succeeding in stopping this US-China contest are, to be honest, practically zero. And I say this as a geopolitical realist because the decision to have this contest is already baked in. And therefore, what we therefore will see is the unfolding of this contest. So clearly, if ASEAN tries to send a different message to US and China, it'll be very, very difficult. It'll be a major uphill struggle for ASEAN. And fortunately, I can conclude with that piece of good news for all of you. Because the reason, if you read my memoirs, you will find, especially in the first few chapters, a large part of my life was an uphill struggle. I was born in a very poor family, in a very poor Singapore. In fact, at the age of 6 months, my mother was told by a doctor, "You have lost your son. He's an infant diarrhea. He's going to go." Fortunately, I didn't go. And then at the age of 6 years, when I went to school, I was put in a special feeding program because I was technically undernourished. Now, as you can see, I'm overnourished. And I used to live in a place where the gangsters would fight each other. I would go to the coffee shop and bring home my father with his shirt torn as he had fought with beer bottles with somebody else. It was a very different Singapore I grew up in. It was a real uphill struggle for me. And what's the big lesson I learned in my life from an uphill struggle? It can be very fulfilling. Even when the odds are against you, don't give up. Keep on trying. Keep on fighting. And since we have, at the end of the day, a very sensible, rational message to convey to US and China,